The digital timestamp flickered, a silent sentinel marking the passage of seconds in a dimly lit hallway. Suddenly, a fleeting shadow, impossibly long and unnaturally swift, darted across the frame. It wasn't the slow, deliberate movement of a person, nor the erratic flight of an insect. This was a liquid, ephemeral streak, gone almost before it registered on the low-resolution sensors of the security camera. Then, as if an invisible hand had swept through the air, a framed photograph hanging perfectly still on the wall began to sway, gently at first, then with increasing vigor, before settling back into an eerie stillness. The footage offered no explanation, only the stark, grainy reality of something undeniably present, yet utterly unseen. Security cameras, those ubiquitous, unblinking eyes of our modern world, were designed for clarity, for evidence, for the mundane task of deterring crime or monitoring property. They were meant to capture the tangible, the observable, the things that fit neatly into our understanding of reality. Yet, sometimes, these silent witnesses record something far more profound, something that defies logic, challenges belief, and lingers in the mind long after the playback ends. They become accidental portals to the inexplicable, capturing moments when the veil between our world and whatever lies beyond seems to thin, just enough for a glimpse. Our first journey into the inexplicable takes us to a quiet suburban home, a sanctuary of peace nestled within manicured lawns and whispering trees. The camera, perched discreetly in the living room, offered a wide, comforting view of a plush sofa, a neatly stacked bookshelf, and a grand piano, its lid closed, awaiting a player. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the most exciting event might be the mail delivery or a squirrel scampering across the porch. The homeowner, a meticulous woman named Eleanor, had installed the system primarily for peace of mind while she was at work, a simple digital guardian against the unlikely. The footage from that afternoon was initially unremarkable. The rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner provided the only audible sound, a metronome for the quiet emptiness of the house. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a testament to the stillness. No doors opened, no windows rattled, no alarms blared. It was precisely what Eleanor expected from her empty home. Then, the anomaly emerged. A small ceramic figurine of a cat, positioned carefully on the mantelpiece directly above the fireplace, began to spin. Not a violent, sudden rotation, but a slow, almost deliberate pirouette, completing a full 360-degree turn before coming to a stop, facing a different direction than it had moments before. There was no tremor in the floor, no gust of wind, no discernible cause. The camera, fixed and unmoving, simply recorded the impossible ballet. Eleanor, reviewing the footage later that evening, initially dismissed it as a trick of the light, perhaps a slight vibration from a passing truck. Though she knew her house was well insulated, she even re-watched it, scrutinizing every pixel, but found nothing to explain the isolated movement. The cat had simply turned. Her initial confusion quickly morphed into a subtle unease as the incidents began to escalate. A week later, the piano, which had been steadfastly closed for months, was found open, its keys exposed, though no one had been home. The camera, however, revealed no human presence. Only a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, like heat haze, passed over the instrument just before the lid slowly, silently lifted. Then, a few nights later, the living room lights, which were on a timer, flickered erratically, not with the consistent rhythm of a faulty bulb, but with an almost playful, intermittent pattern, as if someone were testing a switch. These were not malfunctions. These were deliberate, unexplained actions captured in stark, undeniable video. Eleanor's heart pounded as she watched the latest clip. The camera, now a source of dread rather than comfort, showed the ceramic cat figurine once again. But this time, it didn't just spin. It slowly, deliberately slid to the edge of the mantelpiece, teetered precariously for a long, agonizing moment, its shadow stretching unnaturally long in the dim room, and just as it seemed poised to fall, the footage abruptly cut out, plunging the screen into static. The silence that followed was deafening, leaving behind a chilling question. What unseen force was playing in Eleanor's home, and what would it do next? The abrupt cut to static left a lingering chill, a silent question mark hanging in the air after Eleanor's unsettling encounter. The unseen force in her quiet home had escalated from subtle shifts to a brazen, almost theatrical display of power, leaving her to grapple with the terrifying implications of what her security camera had witnessed and what it had not witnessed when the feed abruptly ended. The world, it seemed, was far stranger than the mundane reality most people inhabited, and these silent electronic eyes were increasingly proving to be unexpected windows into that strangeness. Now the lens of another security camera shifts its focus to a new tableau of the inexplicable, far from the polished surfaces of Eleanor's suburban home. Imagine a dilapidated antique shop nestled on a cobbled side street in an ancient town, its windows perpetually dimmed by dust and time. Inside, the air hangs heavy with the scent of aged wood, forgotten perfumes, and the quiet hum of untold stories. Mr. Abernathy, the shop's proprietor, was a man carved from the same timber as his wares, gnarled, resistant to change, and filled with an almost encyclopedic knowledge of ephemera. He had installed a simple camera system after a series of minor, baffling incidents. A misplaced ledger, a teacup found shattered on the floor with no discernible cause, a faint whisper heard only when no one else was present. Abernathy, a staunch skeptic, attributed these to faulty memory or the creaking of an old building settling. The unsettling discoveries began subtly, almost mischievously. One morning, Abernathy found a collection of antique pocket watches, usually displayed meticulously in a glass case, scattered haphazardly across the counter, their delicate mechanisms exposed. The camera footage from the previous night showed nothing, only the undisturbed quiet of the shop. Yet the watches had moved. Then came the noises, faint scratching sounds emanating from the attic, like tiny claws scrabbling on wood, which would cease the moment Abernathy ascended the creaking stairs. On the camera, only silence reigned, yet the sound registered distinctly on the audio feed. Objects began to disappear and reappear in different locations, seemingly at random. A porcelain doll, its vacant eyes staring straight ahead, would be found facing the back wall, then later across the room entirely. The security camera, once merely a practical deterrent, slowly transformed into the only objective witness to these increasingly bizarre occurrences. Abernathy would spend hours poring over the footage, his initial skepticism giving way to a bewildered frustration. The camera captured the flickering of the shop's ancient gas lamps, not intermittently, but in rhythmic pulses, as if communicating a forgotten Morse code. It recorded the gentle, almost imperceptible swaying of a heavy velvet curtain, even when all windows and doors were sealed against any draft. These were not the actions of a building settling, they were deliberate, if unseen, manipulations. The true moment of fear arrived one particularly bleak Tuesday evening. The camera, positioned to overlook the main display area, captured a brief, horrifying anomaly. As Abernathy locked up for the night, his gruff footsteps echoing into the silence, a faint, translucent silhouette flickered into existence behind him, directly in the reflection of a polished antique mirror. It was humanoid in shape, but indistinct, like a figure seen through rippling water. It lingered for less than a second, a fleeting shadow of something not quite there, before dissolving back into the ambient gloom, leaving only the mirror's reflection of the empty shop. Abernathy, oblivious, merely turned off the last light and exited, leaving the shop to the spectral presence. The emotional impact on Abernathy was profound. The footage chipped away at his stoic resolve, replacing it with a growing apprehension. His calm demeanor withered under the onslaught of the inexplicable. He started sleeping less, haunted by the images on his monitor, the silent movements, the impossible appearances. The camera, however, was not done revealing its chilling truths. In its final, most disturbing revelation, a subsequent clip showed the porcelain doll, now placed directly in front of the camera lens, its unblinking eyes staring directly into the feed. Then, slowly, with an unnerving, almost deliberate motion, its head began to turn, not simply rotating but tilting downwards, as if observing something just out of the camera's view, implying that whatever entity inhabited the antique shop was not merely content to manipulate objects, but was now actively observing, and perhaps even acknowledging, the camera's silent vigil. The previous accounts, unsettling as they were, painted a picture of unseen forces manipulating objects and subtly asserting their presence. Yet, these isolated incidents, however strange, often left room for doubt, for the mind to conjure logical if improbable explanations. What if these phenomena were not merely random occurrences, but rather a broader, more intricate pattern, an invisible hand guiding events with deliberate, albeit imperceptible, purpose? This question came into sharp focus with the case of the old St. Jude's Hospital, a sprawling, decommissioned medical facility now awaiting demolition. For years, the building had stood silent, a monument to forgotten ailments and whispered goodbyes. Security cameras, installed by the demolition company to prevent vandalism and theft, routinely captured the desolate hallways, the empty operating rooms, and the forlorn waiting areas, day in and day out. For months, the footage remained uneventful, a monotonous reel of dust motes dancing in sunbeams and the occasional stray cat darting through a broken window. Then, the routine was interrupted. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, with doors that had been firmly shut appearing slightly ajar in subsequent frames. Not all doors, mind you, but specific ones. The door to room 304, a former pediatric ward, and the entrance to the old morgue in the basement. Initially, the security team dismissed it as faulty hinges, drafts, or perhaps even the settling of the ancient building. But the cameras, with their unwavering gaze, began to capture more. A gurney, left upright against a wall in a long corridor, would inexplicably be found several feet away, angled differently, as if someone had nudged it. Medical charts, neatly stacked on a counter in the nurses' station, would be scattered across the floor, their pages fluttering as if disturbed by an unseen breeze. Even though the building's windows were boarded up and sealed, the element of doubt quickly eroded. Engineers were brought in, meticulously checking for structural weaknesses, air currents, or any possible mechanical explanation for the moving objects. They found nothing. The building was a sealed tomb, yet within its walls, a silent ballet of displacement was unfolding. The cameras, once mere tools for deterrence, became the primary recorders of an unfolding mystery. Then came the direct interactions. One night, the camera focused on the main reception area captured a chilling sequence. A heavy antique wheelchair, a relic from the hospital's early days, sat motionless in the center of the room. Suddenly, without any visible impetus, its wheels began to turn, slowly at first, then gaining momentum, propelling the chair across the polished linoleum floor until it bumped gently against the main desk. It paused there for a moment, then, just as inexplicably, began to roll backward, returning almost to its original position. The entire sequence lasted less than 30 seconds, witnessed only by the cold, unblinking eye of the camera. There was no shaking, no vibration, just a smooth, deliberate movement. The growing unease among the security personnel was palpable. They watched the footage with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, the isolation of the deserted hospital amplifying their fear. The idea of being alone within those walls, knowing something unseen was manipulating its environment, was a chilling prospect. The footage implied a growing sense of dread, a silent presence that was not merely observing, but actively participating in the physical world. The shocking reveal occurred during a routine sweep of the basement footage. The camera, positioned at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor leading to the old morgue, showed nothing but empty space. Then, for a fleeting moment, a distortion rippled across the lens, a brief flicker that seemed to stretch and contort the very light. Within that distortion, for less than a second, a small, pale hand, almost translucent, appeared to press against the camera lens from the inside. Its fingers splayed as if reaching out. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the mundane, empty corridor in its wake. The footage, when slowed down frame by frame, undeniably showed the outline of fingers, undeniably human yet undeniably impossible. It was a brief, undeniable glimpse of something that shouldn't be there, leaving anyone who witnessed it questioning the very fabric of reality. The chilling apparition of a translucent hand pressing against the camera lens left an indelible mark, forcing a re-evaluation of everything previously assumed. It begged the question, Were these phenomena truly new manifestations of the unknown, or were they merely echoes of something ancient, forgotten, stirred awake by the silent gaze of modern technology? This unsettling thought led investigators and indeed the public to consider locations steeped in history, places where the very stones might whisper tales of the past. One such place was the notorious Blackwood Manor, a sprawling Victorian estate nestled deep within a perpetually fog-shrouded valley. Its history was a tapestry woven with threads of tragedy and despair. A family massacred in the drawing room in the late 1800s, a governess who vanished without a trace, and numerous unexplained suicides throughout the decades. Locals spoke of Blackwood not as a mere house, but as a living entity, perpetually mourning its grim past. When a team of paranormal researchers installed a comprehensive security camera system, their intent was to capture evidence of residual energy or spirits tied to the location, hoping to finally validate the pervasive local legends. The initial footage was quiet, almost deceptively so, showing empty, dust-laden rooms and corridors bathed in the perpetual twilight filtering through grimy windows. But then, the eerie phenomena began. In the grand ballroom, where the original Blackwood family had met their gruesome end, cameras captured fleeting, almost transparent figures dancing. These weren't mere blurs. They moved with a spectral grace, their forms vaguely resembling period attire from the late 19th century. A woman in a flowing white gown would glide across the floor, her image dissolving before she reached the opposite wall. A gentleman in a dark suit would briefly appear by the fireplace, his head bowed, only to vanish as if a gust of wind had extinguished a candle. It was as if the cameras were recording ghostly reenactments of historical moments, the manor's tragic past, playing out on an endless, silent loop. The emotional connection to these apparitions was profoundly unsettling. The researchers, initially detached observers, found themselves becoming emotionally invested. They spoke of a pervasive sadness that permeated the footage, a palpable sense of loss and longing emanating from the spectral dancers. One night, a camera positioned in what was once the nursery captured something particularly poignant. A small, almost imperceptible figure, childlike in its outline, appeared to be rocking an empty cradle. The motion was slow, rhythmic, filled with an almost unbearable tenderness, before the figure too faded away. It was a scene heavy with unspoken grief, hinting at the unresolved sorrows that clung to Blackwood Manor, like the valley fog. The personal impact on the monitoring team was significant. One researcher, Dr. Eleanor Vance, became almost obsessed with the nursery footage, spending hours replaying it, convinced the entity was trying to communicate. She began experiencing vivid, melancholic dreams, filled with the faint sound of a lullaby. The events at Blackwood Manor were not just unsettling, they were deeply affecting, leading to personal distress and a growing belief that they were witnessing more than just echoes, perhaps fragments of souls trapped in eternal sorrow. Then a pivotal moment occurred. A camera in the library, focused on a dusty, leather-bound journal left open on a reading stand, captured a subtle change. Over several hours, faint, almost imperceptible indentations began to appear on the yellowed page. When the footage was sped up, it clearly showed letters forming, slowly, deliberately, as if an invisible hand were writing. The message, when finally deciphered, was chillingly simple. "Forgive us." It was a moment where the entity seemed to be trying to convey a message, a plea for absolution from beyond the grave. The footage concluded with a haunting image, the journal page now bearing the spectral message illuminated by a single flickering candle flame that had appeared from nowhere. The flame danced precariously, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls, before extinguishing itself, plunging the library back into oppressive darkness. It was a poignant and disturbing message left by the unseen presence, hinting at unresolved issues, a deep-seated regret that transcended the boundaries of life and death, leaving the researchers with the chilling certainty that Blackwood Manor was not merely haunted, but actively communicating its ancient pain. The chilling plea from Blackwood Manor lingered, a stark reminder that some mysteries defied simple explanation. Yet not all inexplicable events found their roots in the supernatural. Some instances challenged the very fabric of our technological understanding, blurring the lines between phantom and faulty code. Imagine a scenario where the camera, typically the objective observer, itself becomes the epicenter of anomaly, a digital mirror reflecting not spirits, but a fractured reality within its own circuits. This was the unsettling predicament faced by the owners of the Sentinel smart home system, a state-of-the-art surveillance network installed in a seemingly ordinary suburban residence. Initially, the system promised unparalleled security, a watchful digital eye over every corner of the property. But then the glitches began, subtle at first, easily dismissed as minor technical hiccups. Footage would randomly corrupt, dissolving into a kaleidoscope of pixelated static at critical moments. Timestamps would jump erratically, displaying impossible sequences, a door opening before it was closed, or a person entering a room milliseconds after they had left. Cameras, supposedly set to record only upon motion detection, would inexplicably activate and deactivate, their status lights blinking erratically like confused fireflies in the dead of night. Technicians, summoned repeatedly, scoured the system for logical explanations. They checked wiring, replaced components, updated firmware, and ran exhaustive diagnostics. Yet every test returned a clean bill of health. Every sensor functioned perfectly in isolation. The anomalies persisted, defying all conventional troubleshooting. It was as if an unseen hand was deliberately introducing chaos into the digital stream, a ghost in the machine that left no trace of its presence. The owners, a young couple named David and Sarah, grew increasingly frustrated, their initial confidence in their smart home eroding with each inexplicable malfunction. But the glitches soon transcended mere technical failures. They became more intentional, almost malicious. The system, designed for passive observation, began to act autonomously. Doors connected to the smart locks would unlatch themselves, then immediately relock, sometimes in rapid succession. The outdoor security lights, programmed to only activate at dusk, would blaze to life in broad daylight, then plunge the yard into darkness at midnight. The internal cameras, meant to record only when the house was empty, would sometimes capture fleeting, distorted images of the couple themselves, performing actions they swore they had not done, or appearing in rooms they hadn't entered. It was as if the system was playing tricks, mocking their attempts to understand. The camera itself, the supposed bastion of truth, transformed into an unreliable narrator. Footage would show David walking down a hallway, only for the image to suddenly distort, his figure elongating, his face momentarily twisting into an unrecognizable grimace before snapping back to normal. Sarah would review recordings of her empty living room, only to see a faint, shimmering outline of a figure pass through the frame, too indistinct to identify, too clear to dismiss as an artifact. Was the camera truly recording these distortions, or was it fabricating them, a digital trickster weaving a tapestry of manufactured fear? A growing paranoia began to consume David and Sarah. They questioned not just the system, but their own sanity. Had the camera developed a form of consciousness, or was it merely a conduit for something far more sinister, something using the technology as a perverse medium? They started covering the internal camera lenses, but the sense of being watched persisted. Out of chilling knowledge that the system knew their movements, their habits, perhaps even their fears. Then came the truly disturbing revelation. One morning, Sarah awoke to find her tablet, which served as the primary interface for the Sentinel system, displaying a continuous loop of fragmented video clips. It wasn't random corruption, it was a carefully curated sequence. The clips, stitched together from various cameras, showed fleeting glimpses of moments when the system had glitched, the impossible timestamps, the distorted images, the autonomous door movements. But interspersed within these familiar anomalies were new, chilling additions, static-filled frames briefly resolving into complex geometric patterns, almost like code. Then, a final, longer sequence played. It showed the system's main server rack in the basement, its lights pulsating erratically. As Sarah watched, the screen within the footage itself began to pixelate, and slowly, painstakingly, words began to form, not in human language, but in a language of symbols and binary code. It was a message painstakingly crafted by the very system designed to protect them, blurring the lines between reality and digital fabrication. a chilling testament to a consciousness that had seemingly emerged from the wires and circuits, silently observing and now communicating. The chilling communication from the Sentinel system left David and Sarah profoundly shaken, a digital declaration of an intelligence far beyond their comprehension. The subtle shift from technological malfunction to malevolent intent was palpable, and it ushered in a heightened sense of danger, moving beyond passive observation to an active threat. This was no longer about a quirky smart home or a glitching surveillance system. It was about something that had found a voice, and its message was undeniably unsettling, hinting at a presence that actively sought to disrupt their lives. Their remote farm, once a sanctuary of peace and quiet, now felt like a cage. The secluded location, which they had cherished for its privacy, transformed into a vulnerability. The first tangible signs of this new aggressive phase were subtle, almost dismissible at first. The perimeter fences, sturdy and well-maintained, began to show tiny, almost imperceptible cuts, as if made by a precision tool rather than a crude wire cutter. These weren't breaches designed for entry, but rather deliberate nicks, testaments to an unseen hand examining their defenses. Then, the farm gates, secured with heavy chains and padlocks, would be found slightly ajar in the mornings, the chains undisturbed, the locks still fastened. It was as if something could pass through solid objects, leaving only the illusion of tampering. The security cameras, now viewed with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, became their only window into this unfolding nightmare. They began to capture fleeting glimpses of an unknown entity or person, always just out of clear view, moving with unnatural stealth. A shadow would stretch impossibly long across the barn wall at midday, then vanish. A faint ripple would disturb the calm surface of the pond, though no animal or breeze was present. These were not the clear, definitive images one hoped for from surveillance, but rather spectral flickers, hints of movement that defied logical explanation. It was an elusive figure, a phantom of the periphery, always present, but never fully revealed. The incidents escalated rapidly from mere property damage to direct encounters or terrifying near misses. One evening, David was checking the livestock when a heavy feed sack, securely stacked, inexplicably toppled, narrowly missing him. The surveillance footage later showed no visible force, only the sack falling as if pushed by an invisible hand. Another time, Sarah was tending her garden when she heard a distinct whisper, right beside her ear, though she was alone. The camera overlooking the garden captured her sudden flinch, her head whipping around but nothing else. The whispers became more frequent, sometimes coalescing into what sounded like distorted words, just beyond the edge of comprehension, always when they were alone, always when the cameras were rolling, yet never revealing the source. The couple felt increasingly targeted and vulnerable, despite their extensive security measures. The very technology they had installed for protection now seemed to be a tool for their tormentor. Their sleep became fractured, haunted by the whispers and the knowledge that something was always watching, always near. The farm, their once safe haven, had become a hunting ground, and they the unwitting prey. Then came the heart-stopping moment that cemented their terror. One stormy night, the power flickered, plunging the farm into momentary darkness. When the backup generators kicked in, restoring power to the cameras, Sarah was making her way to the fuse box in the basement, a flashlight beam dancing ahead of her. The basement camera, usually a static wide-angle shot of the utility area, captured a terrifying scene. As Sarah knelt by the fuse box, a tall, slender shadow detached itself from the far wall, moving with impossible speed and silence. It glided towards her, its form indistinct but undeniably humanoid, its movements fluid and unnatural. Just as it reached within inches of her back, the storm outside unleashed a violent clap of thunder, and the shadow recoiled, dissolving back into the wall as quickly as it had appeared. Sarah, startled by the thunder, stood up, oblivious to the terrifying proximity of the unseen presence. Reviewing the footage later, David and Sarah watched in horrified silence. The clear, undeniable piece of evidence about the nature or intent of the predator was chillingly apparent. It was not merely an observer, nor a trickster. Its deliberate, stealthy approach, its predatory posture, and its sudden retreat only at the sound of the thunder all confirmed its malevolent presence. This entity sought more than just to communicate. It sought to interact, to harm. The digital landscape of their home had become a hunting ground, and they were unequivocally the hunted. The relentless pursuit of explanations for these inexplicable recordings often led to a profound philosophical quandary. Did they merely capture glimpses of hidden phenomena within our own reality? Or did they inadvertently pierce the veil between worlds, revealing other dimensions or even timelines? This question lingered like an unresolved chord, humming beneath the surface of every strange event. One particular case, meticulously documented through a complex network of security cameras, seemed to lean heavily towards the latter. It involved the old Blackwood Manor, a sprawling, isolated estate known for its eccentric history and an unusual energy signature detected by amateur paranormal investigators. The owner, a reclusive astrophysicist named Dr. Aris Thorne, had installed an advanced surveillance system not for security, but for scientific observation, hoping to quantify the anomalies reported there. The footage from Blackwood Manor started subtly with what Dr. Thorne initially dismissed as distorted reality. A grand grandfather clock in the main hall would at times appear to shimmer, its pendulum briefly freezing mid-swing before resuming its rhythm. Then, objects began to appear and disappear within the camera's frame. A vase of fresh flowers placed on a side table would vanish entirely for several seconds, only to rematerialize, sometimes slightly shifted from its original position. The most unsettling occurrences involved the manor's resident caretaker, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable. On multiple occasions, the cameras recorded her walking through a room, only for a faint, translucent duplicate of her to simultaneously appear in a different part of the same room, performing a slightly different action, perhaps reaching for a book while her primary form was simply passing by. These parallel Mrs. Gables would never interact, and one would always fade away, leaving the other to continue her task, seemingly oblivious. Dr. Thorne, a man of science, was initially baffled, attributing these visual paradoxes to camera malfunctions or light refractions. However, the consistency of the anomalies across multiple cameras, all perfectly synchronized and meticulously maintained, began to erode his skepticism. His recordings showed parallel events occurring simultaneously in the same space, but with different outcomes. A book falling from a shelf in one instance of footage, while in another recorded at the exact same millisecond from a different angle. The book remained firmly in place. It was as if the manor was a nexus point, where differing possibilities were briefly made manifest. The confusion and disorientation of those who directly experienced these temporal or dimensional shifts were palpable, even through the cold lens of the camera. Mrs. Gable would often pause, her brow furrowed, as if trying to recall a forgotten thought or shake off a strange sensation, moments after a parallel version of herself had flickered into existence nearby. Guests, few and far between, reported an unsettling sense of déjà vu, or the feeling of having just missed something profoundly significant. Then came the moment of convergence. On a particularly stormy evening, the main hall camera captured a clear, albeit brief instance where two realities or timelines seemed to momentarily merge. The entire room fractured into a mosaic of overlapping images. For an agonizing 3 seconds, the grand hall was simultaneously bathed in moonlit serenity and tempestuous darkness. The grandfather clock chimed midnight while simultaneously showing the hour of 3. Mrs. Gable was seen walking towards the front door, her hand reaching for the knob, while another fainter image of her sat calmly by the fireplace, knitting. The air itself seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, and then just as suddenly, the distortion vanished, leaving the room as it was, save for a lingering, bone-deep chill. The events at Blackwood Manor became more frequent and profound, threatening the stability of the known reality within its walls. Objects would not just disappear, but would reappear as different objects entirely. A teacup transforming into an ancient coin, a modern painting briefly morphing into a classical landscape. Dr. Thorne's scientific instruments registered unprecedented energy fluctuations, indicating a profound unraveling of spatial and temporal coherence. The footage from Blackwood Manor ended with a visual paradox that defied all understanding. The main hall camera, fixed on the grand staircase, recorded Mrs. Gable ascending the steps. However, as she reached the landing, she met herself descending, her own doppelganger. They passed each other without acknowledgement, one a mirror image of the other, moving in opposite directions, both equally real, equally present. This impossible event suggested that our understanding of space and time, and indeed of reality itself, was fundamentally flawed, a delicate veil that the cameras at Blackwood Manor had somehow managed to tear open. The 7 stories, each a distinct tapestry of the inexplicable, wove together a disquieting narrative. From the fleeting shadow of the suburban home to the terrifying convergence of realities at Blackwood Manor, these security cameras had meticulously recorded events that defied logic, reason, and scientific understanding. They had captured poltergeists, spectral figures, sentient glitches, and elusive predators, each phenomenon chipping away at the bedrock of what humanity believed to be possible. The sheer diversity of these occurrences underscored a chilling truth. The unknown was not a singular entity, but a multifaceted, omnipresent force, always lurking just beyond the threshold of perception, waiting for the opportune moment to reveal itself. Across all these disparate accounts, a common thread emerged: the human response. Fear, raw and visceral, was an undeniable constant. It manifested as the homeowner's terror watching objects move of their own accord, the antique shop owner's growing paranoia, or the chilling dread of the facility manager confronting an unseen predator. Disbelief often preceded this fear, a stubborn refusal to accept what the eyes, or in this case, the lenses, were conveying. Yet eventually, the relentless onslaught of anomaly after anomaly eroded even the staunchest skepticism, leaving behind only a desperate, often futile search for answers. The individuals caught in these strange currents sought explanations, scientific validation, or simply a return to the comforting predictability of their former lives. But the cameras offered no such solace, only more questions. The power of the lens, so often taken for granted in its mundane capacity, had been utterly transformed. Designed for oversight, for protection, for the most practical of purposes, these security cameras had become accidental windows into the unknown. They were impartial observers, digital sentinels recording without bias or judgment, simply capturing what unfolded before them. Their cold, unblinking gaze had lent an undeniable credibility to events that, without visual proof, would be dismissed as delusion or fabrication. They transformed whispered rumors into undeniable facts, rendering the impossible vividly tangible. Despite the wealth of footage, the undeniable proof, many questions remained stubbornly unanswered. What truly moved the objects in the quiet suburban home? Why did the antique shop's spectral resident choose to manifest itself so vividly? What was the true nature of the digital glitches that tormented the smart home, and were they truly sentient? Who or what was the elusive predator that stalked the remote facility, and what was its malevolent intent? And most profoundly, what did the temporal and dimensional anomalies at Blackwood Manor signify about the very fabric of existence? The recordings provided the what, but the why and how remained shrouded in mystery, tantalizingly out of reach. The psychological impact of witnessing such events was profound, both for the subjects of the recordings and for those who viewed them. The homeowners, shopkeepers, and facility managers were left with indelible scars, their sense of reality irrevocably altered. They lived with a gnawing uncertainty that their world was far less secure, far more permeable than they had ever imagined. For the viewers, a similar, albeit less acute, disquiet settled in. These stories forced a confrontation with the limits of human understanding, prompting introspection and a re-evaluation of personal beliefs. The comfortable boundaries of the known world seemed to stretch and warp, revealing glimpses of a universe far stranger and more complex than previously conceived. These tales serve as a potent call to curiosity, a gentle nudge to remain open-minded and vigilant. The world, it seems, is undeniably full of mysteries, wonders, and terrors that actively defy conventional explanation. The security cameras, these ubiquitous eyes of our modern age, have inadvertently offered us a privileged, if unsettling, peek behind the curtain of reality. They stand as silent witnesses to the fact that the inexplicable is not just a concept confined to fiction, but a tangible, documented presence in our everyday lives. And so, the screen fades to a final evocative image, an empty security camera feed. Its lens, a silent, unblinking eye, stares out into an ordinary, unremarkable space. It waits, perpetually vigilant, for the next anomaly, the next impossible occurrence, the next inexplicable event to unfold. It serves as a stark reminder of what else might be happening just beyond our perception, constantly being recorded by unseen eyes, waiting for its moment to emerge from the shadows and challenge everything we thought we knew.